Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'd like to talk to you and help you understand what inflation and deflation are, what they're good or not, and where they come from. So without any further ado, let's jump into the topic. So inflation simply is that the money that you have loses its value. So what does this mean? So if you go to the supermarket and normally you're able to buy something for $1, and if 1 month later you have to pay $1.10 for it, but the good is exactly the same. It can be a chocolate bar, it can be whatever. If the good doesn't change, but the money that you have to pay for it increases, this means that there's inflation going on, meaning that you can buy less of the same with the same amount of money. And so the inflation rate actually shows us how fast this inflation is going on. And most countries actually, one way or another, have to cope with inflation. Oftentimes the only difference is how fast the inflation is going on. So where does inflation come from? So it has a couple of layers to it. So the first one is the increase of money supply. So we can think about countries printing money, for example, and this way the amount of money in circulation increasing. If the amount of goods are not increasing that fast, which is often the case, right? You can't change the speed with which you are increasing the amount of products on the market. If the money supply increases faster, then you get inflation. Stimulus programs are also one way in which the money supply increases. For example, very cheap credits, for example, that will help consumers and businesses do their purchases or invest. And also, for example, the state buying bonds, and this way giving again extra money to the market is one way in which the money supply can increase, and with this inflation can arise. One thing also is, for example, the currency loss in terms of its value. So think about it. What happened in the UK? The UK sterling, the UK pound lost its value, tens of percentages. And what you then get is that because the value decreases of the currency, anything that has to be bought from abroad suddenly becomes more expensive. And of course, this more expensive product will also become more expensive when consumers within the UK are going to buy this product, for example, again at the supermarket. And this again is one way in which we get inflation, a price increase of a product because the currency lost its value. Thirdly, you can also have imports that are independent of the currency driving prices up. So think about, for example, oil prices, right? If your country is a country that imports a lot of oil, then not just the dollar is something that changes the price of oil, right? It's also about demand and supply for oil. So when the oil price increases, and if your country has to import it, this is of course going to reflect onto the oil price within the country itself. And this is again one way in which inflation can arise. So inflation often is being calculated as a basket of things. So you have many types of goods, and most of the time these get certain weights by, these are determined by how much the population uses, consumes, or values each type of product. And then this basket with all of these weights per good on average shows how on average again the prices of goods in a country increase. So the basket is important here. If just chocolate increases by, let's say, 10 cents, this is not inflation that we're talking about, because something else might decrease in price, and on average actually you might have decreasing prices. So we talked about inflation, the rate of inflation. So if we have today 2% of inflation, let's say, as inflation rate, and if we have tomorrow 1% of inflation, this doesn't mean that the prices are decreasing, okay? Because we still have inflation. So a decreasing inflation rate just means that the speed with which goods are becoming more expensive decreases. If you want to have prices decrease, then we are talking about deflation, not inflation, okay? So a decreasing inflation rate does not mean that goods become cheaper, just the speed with which the inflation is going on. So the prices are increasing, it's decreasing in terms of pace. So deflation is something that countries actually try to prevent. So countries don't want goods on average, so across the board, to become cheaper. Why? Because, think about it, you're a consumer, and if you know that tomorrow something is going to be cheaper, you're going to delay your purchase, right? But if you know that something is kind of stable in terms of price or even increasing, then you will want to buy because tomorrow it can be more expensive. So if you are in a situation with deflation and products becoming cheaper all the time, then you're going to delay your purchase as much as possible. And this is, of course, going to derail an economy that is especially built on consumer purchases being important. So, inflation is often what economies want, but, too high inflation is also a problem. So if you're a consumer and, things are increasing by the second in terms of price, then, of course, this is going to erode your wealth. And with that, again, this quality of your spending. And with this is going to hurt, of course, businesses as well. Because, if businesses cannot account for this, so if they are going to increase the prices all the time, but the consumer can't buy it, then businesses are going to hurt and they are going to go bankrupt. At the same time, their workers may want to be, accounted for this inflation. And again, if they can't do that, if there's no demand for it, that's again a major problem. And also think about business investment. You don't want to invest in an area where there's so high inflation that you're actually not sure whether consumers are able to buy what's going to come out of the investment, and whether the businesses that you invest in, whether they're going to exist still tomorrow. So it's important that there's inflation, but it should be, low. And ideally, it should be below the GDP increase, so below the pace with which the economy is increasing, because you don't want an economy to increase just because inflation is increasing, just because you have increasing prices. So if an economy grows faster than there's inflation, then actually we're talking about the real growth and not growth that is just being inflated by inflation. So for developed nations, oftentimes we want about 2%, and for developing nations about 5%, because a developing nation oftentimes grows faster than a developed nation, and that's why they often are allowed to have more inflation, because their growth will most likely surpass it anyway. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if so, don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. I wish you all the best in the world and hope to see you again in future videos. Take care.